Hi everyone, Blaine here, and today I'm going to be showing you the general pre-flight and power-up checklist from Cold and Dark for the Boeing 747-800 series through SSG. This is an aircraft that is payware that you can purchase from the X-Plane org store. So with that, let's begin. We're going to jump into the aircraft, and we are configured to Cold and Dark. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the parking brake is set. And it is, because it's in the up position, so that's great. Now we're going to go to the overhead panel, and we're going to start by turning on the battery, closing the guard. We're going to turn standby power to auto. We're now going to turn on the bus ties, followed by the generator controls. And then for the hydraulic pumps, we're going to leave them to off except for engine 4. We're going to turn that to auxiliary. We're now going to turn the engine hydraulic controls to on. And then we're going to turn external power on because we have the ground power unit on. Now we're going to increase the lighting in the cabin. And we're going to turn on the electrical controls at the top here. Now we're going to turn the utilities on. And then we're going to turn our lights on. So we're going to turn on nav, and we're going to turn on wing. Logo you don't have to have on unless it's really nighttime flying or you want to. Now we're going to configure the IRS, so we're going to switch these to nav. And we're going to go to the FMC. This aircraft doesn't have an alignment for the IRS in terms of similar to like the Zebo where it takes time and you actually have to confirm it. But what it does is it does let you go through the process of aligning it so you can, have that, I don't know what you'd call it, the belief that, you turn the knob so therefore the IRS will align. So you go to FMC and position initial, and you just make sure that this is, I guess, populated here. You can't do anything with it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the flight assistant pad, which is just to the side over here, and we're going to do some things here. So you're going to turn it on, and as you can see, it's the Boeing 747-8 through Supercritical Simulations Group, or SSG. First thing you're going to do is you're going to go to options, and you're going to configure it how you want. I have it set to not show the yoke, I have it set to pounds, and I have it not to show rain effects. You can change those by simply, clicking whatever button you'd like. So the first thing we want to do is add payload to the aircraft, and you can either do this through SimBrief or you can do this yourself. There's two ways. You can either add the weight by pushing the up arrow here, like so forth, and that will obviously tell you what the pounds are, or you can go through the presets here, which will load the aircraft to the whatever one you want. So let's say for this flight we're going to do 50, and then we'd hit load aircraft. And now it's loaded. When you actually go into the FMC to program that, your zero fuel weight will equal this, and that's how you know it's correct. Next, you're going to go to fuel, and you're going to add fuel in here. Now, ordinarily, I'd get this calculation from SimBrief, but just for this one, for this video, I'm going to do it by going to, 70,000. And then you'd hit load fuel. Oh, sorry, I apologize. You have to hit, where it says manual select, you have to hit FMC select so it knows to preset it, and then you'd go load fuel. And you can see the fuel is currently loading. It doesn't take that long to do. And it's loaded. And then, even though this is loaded, you can always double check it by going to Flight Configuration, Customize, Weight and Fuel, and it will tell you here, and you can see the total fuel weight is just over 70,000, so you know that it's okay. Okay, so back to the aircraft now. We're going to go back to the overhead panel, and we're going to check the fuel pumps, so we can see that they're all turned off right now. That's fine. Fuel crossfeeds, though, we want to turn on. And we want to make sure that anti-ice is off unless it's below 10 degrees. And how we can check that is by looking here, just above the N1 panel, and we can see that it's 7 degrees Celsius, 17, so we don't need it. So with that, we're going to go back to the overhead panel. We're going to turn on window heat now, and then we're going to turn on the yaw dampers. And now we're going to start the APU. So you would first turn it to on, and then start, and it will release. Give it a minute, and then what will happen is the generators will appear as available. And you can see the APU generators have now become available. So we would select these, and now the APU generators are on and the external power is not. So then what we would do is we would go back to the flight assistant here, and we would disconnect the ground power because we no longer need it. So we go to options and hit GPU disconnect. Okay? Now we're going to go back to the overhead panel. We're going to turn the packs on, and we're going to turn the isolation valves on, and the APU bleed. So now it's time to program the FMC. So we're going to go to Menu, and then Ident. We want to make sure we have the current AirAct cycle, which we do. We're going to go to Position Initial. We've obviously done the the IRS configuration, so we now go to root, and now we're going to populate this information with our origin, which will be KSAN, or San Diego. Our destination will be KLAX. Ordinarily, you wouldn't use this type of aircraft to go this distance because it's really not that far, but I know this route off by heart because I fly it a lot when I'm training or testing stuff, so that's why we're going to use it. Departing runway 27, flight number 175, and then we're going to hit activate, and it's going to prompt us, do we want to execute this? Yes, we do. Now we're going to go to root, and then pref. So here we're going to enter this information here, so our cost index will be 50. This depends on the airline and the fuel and things like that. I'm just using 50 as a number kind of in between, but you should always look up which aircraft you're flying with to see what the cost index is. For reserves, I'm going to select 5. And then for zero fuel weight here, you would want to line select here. And as you can see, it's 566. If I go back to the flight assistant pad over here, and I hit fuel, payload, it's 566. So that number is correct, so that's great. Now we're going to select here the altitude. We can enter our cruise altitude. It doesn't have to be this, but this is the recommended one based on the fuel and the payload. So you'd enter 136 and line select. Now we're going to go to thrust limit. And we're not going to enter the temperature. We're going to do that in a little bit. And we're going to select our climb. So we're going to do this. Go to takeoff. And we are going to configure our trim, which will be 6.8. You can configure that. You're supposed to be able to configure the trim by here, but these aren't modeled. So my suggestion would be to use like to bind set trim, and then from there it'll go up or down. And how you know you've setting trim correctly, so we have 6.8, is you look at this number right here, and you'd want that to be 6.8. So now trim is set correctly. Okay, so now what we're going to do is actually choose our flight plan. So we're going to go to DEP and Arrival. We are departing from KSAN, and we're going to select our runway. And we're going to choose Falc 1 and SXC and hit Execute. We're going to go to Departure Arrival again. We're going to KLAX, and we're going to choose our star, which is going to be Ocean 3, and our runway, which is going to be 07 right, with with exert being the transition, or approach I should say. And then we're going to hit execute. It gives me this this error, unable cruise alt, but it doesn't affect me flying at all, so I would simply just say, if you get that, just to hit clear. Now what we need to do is configure our flight plan. So we're going to go to legs, and we're going to go to the EFIS panel, and we're going to change this to plan. And then we're going to change the distance to 10. And then what you want to do is you want to, is that not in plan? My apologies. There we go. Then what you want to do is kind of zoom in so your FMC and your nav display are in the same kind of window. And you're going to go along the flight plan looking for discontinuities. You're going to hit step. So I can see we have two discontinuities after our transition, which is SXC. So to remove those, I'm just going to select exert, which is the next available waypoint, and then line select the discontinuity, and it's going to ask me to execute, which I'm going to do. And then the magenta line continues. The system picks it up, and then I hit step again, and I can see that the flight plan is configured correctly. So that's all good. So now what we're going to do is go back to the FMC, and we're going to select menu, and we're going to go to thrust limit, and now we're going to populate the temperature. So we know that it is 17, and then we're going to go to takeoff. We're going to enter our departure flaps level, which will be 10, and then our V speeds have come upon here, so we're going to line select each of them. And 162 is one we want to remember because we're going to need that later on. Now we're going to go back to the EFIS panel and switch this back to map. So now it's time to configure the mode control panel, or MCP. So the first thing we want to do is turn the flight director on. We want to enter the speed that we're going to be using for departure, so that's going to be 162 plus 15. So 162 so it's going to be 177. We're going to arm LNAV and VNAV. We're going to fly the initial runway heading, which you would normally get off of Navigraph. However, for this instance, it's going to be 273. We're going to set our cruise altitude, which in this case I believe it was 13.6. And then we're going to configure auto brakes for RTO rejected takeoff. So now we're going to go back to the overhead panel, and we're going to turn our fuel pumps on. The center fuel one you don't really need to turn on unless you have a large amount of fuel in there, which usually you don't. And how you can find this out is if you go to the nav display here and you go over to this panel here, there's a button that says fuel. And I can see that we have, 10, 21, and we have only 5 in the center one. So because of that, we're not going to turn that fuel pump on. And then you just select nav to go back. Okay, so now we're going to turn the beacon light on. Set that to both. And we're going to turn the hydraulic pumps now. So we're going to turn them to auto. Except for number 4, we're still going to leave that to auxiliary. We're going to turn packs 2 and 3 off. And we're going to turn the engine bleeds on. So now we're ready to start the engines. So we're going to call for a pushback. There's different ways you can do this. You can use better pushback. You can use the tow, which is in here, although it's really buggy. I'd recommend better pushback just for ease of use. We're going to use the in simulation one. So we want to see where we're going. So we're heading over to runway 27. So we want to do a, I believe that would be a right pushback. So we're going to go Shift G, and what we're going to do here is we're going to toggle the brakes just so that it knows where we are, and we're going to do a right pushback.
Okay, a push cart is on it.
And it says a push cart's coming. So now we have to configure for powering the engine up. So we're going to go behind the throttle here, and we're going to turn on the fuel control for engines 3 and 4. And then we're going to, we're pushing back, so we're going to go to the overhead panel, and we're going to pull engine 3 and 4, and then we're going to see the exhaust test temperature gauge is going to begin to climb. Really pushing us back. I'm just going to hit stop because it's being weird there. Okay, so the engines have pretty much started, and they're not going to climb much more. So we're going to do the same thing that we just did. We're going to turn the engine cutoffs on for engines 1 and 2. We're going to go to the overhead panel and we're going to start engines 1 and 2. Okay, so the engines are pretty much good to go there. They have fired. So now what we're going to do is turn off the turn off the APU. So we're going to go up here and we're going to turn the APU off. So we're going to click off. And as you can see, the APU generators have turned off, and so has APU bleed. Those are now off. Now we're going to turn the fourth hydraulic pump to auto. We're going to check to see if our wing anti-ice needs to be turned on at all, and it's still 17 degrees Celsius, so it doesn't need to be turned on. We need to check now, are there any error messages? They'd be located here in yellow or red, and we can't see any, so that's good. So now we're ready to taxi to our departure runway. So we want to turn our lighting on. So we're going to go to the overhead panel and turn taxi lights to on. We're going to configure our flaps for departure, which will be 10 degrees. Oop. There we go. And then we're going to go to the EFIS panel one last time, and we're going to configure it for how we want. So we're going to make sure that traffic is on. We want that on, so TCAS is obviously working. And then we want to make sure the distance is set correctly, so I'm going to set it to 20. And we're going to turn on weather. And now we're ready to taxi. So okay, so we're going to give the engines a little bit of juice. We're going to go to the overhead panel. I'm going to turn the packs back on. Toggle the brake. And we're going to taxi to our departure runway. Okay, so you want to activate the parking brake. You want to do a final couple of things, so you want to go to the overhead panel, and you want to turn on strobe, make sure beacon is set to both. I can see that it is already, that's good. Turn on your landing lights, turn off your taxi lights, arm auto throttle, hit flight path vector, make sure that N1 goes to 70, and then activate toga, which is here, and you're ready to go. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit subscribe to be notified when new videos are posted. Thanks for watching!